we're going to go ahead and get started. Enjoy the show. Alrighty. GEOshow is now live. Explorers, are you ready?
Yeah!
All right, welcome all explorers near and far. You're now watching the GEOshow, and the title of today's show is Washington, D.C., the Monuments Tour. Today's all-free virtual field trip is brought to you by flatclass.club. Teachers, find out what other educators are doing to knock down their classroom walls with the new Flat Class podcast. Check it out at flatclass.club. Today is an interactive show, so that means you can send in your questions, comments, and we always love seeing your pictures as well over on Twitter. So make sure you send them in to hashtag GeoShow. I do not follow my handle during these broadcasts, so please use the hashtag GeoShow if you want me to see it. We also have an in-show Geo quiz today, and you can play along with that quiz using the Kahoot ID over at kahoot.it. That's the URL, kahoot.it. Enter in the ID 344-1118. You can play as a classroom or as individual students if you are a one-to-one school. So, GeoShow is a geography-based show. That means location matters, so let's find out where are we going today on our virtual field trip. Well, we are headed to Washington, D.C. So we're not going to leave the country today. If you are from the U.S., we're going to stay right in here. So no passports required, guys. So it's okay if you left it at home. So we're going to go to the nation's capital, which is Washington, D.C. And why is it located where it is? So let's go ahead and start there before we head into the city and talk about that. So as we zoom out, if we think about when the country was formed, so in the late 1700s, Washington, D.C. is located roughly around about halfway in between the northern colonies or states at this point and the southern states, those 13 originals. So that's why it's more or less located where it is as far as north, south, east, and west. But exactly where it is came down to the decision of George Washington, who was the first president. So the Congress, they decided to, in the original Constitution of the U.S., so in the Constitution it says that a 10-mile by 10-mile district will be formed to house the federal city. And so when Congress first got together, they decided, they wrote something called the Residence Act, and they gave the power to George Washington to decide exactly where this 10 by 10 mile city will be located. Now, it looks a lot different than what it did when George Washington picked it. One of the reasons another one of the reasons it's in its current location is because George Washington's home was right here in Mount Vernon, and it's pretty close to current day Washington, D.C. So we don't know for exactly what reasons he chose, but you know it had to play a part in his decision of picking this location, that it was near his home that he could get to easily. So let's go ahead and zoom back into the district here. We'll point out a couple more interesting things about the shape of Washington, D.C. today. As I'm drawing this 10 by 10 mile shape out, I'll go ahead and start by saying Washington obviously is named after George Washington, and then DC, so it's the district. So it's not a state, so it's a district of Columbia, and Columbia was the nickname of early America. Many times people were called the Columbians, and that came from Christopher Columbus. So where did they get this land from? Well, to the west of the Potomac, so that's over here, this blue shaded area, Virginia gave this land to make Washington, D.C., and Maryland gave this land up here, shaded in red that I'm doing now. And so it was a perfect 10 by 10 square. However, in the 1840s, there was a big debate going on in the country, and Washington, D.C. banned slavery. So they made it where you couldn't have slaves anymore inside of Washington, D.C. Well, that made Virginia angry because Virginia was a slave state. So Virginia took its land back from Washington, D.C. So today, we only have the land that Maryland gave for Washington, D.C. So all the land that's east of the Potomac River, this shaded in area, this is why we have the shape of Washington, D.C. today when you look at it on current maps, and it is not a perfect 10 by 10 mile square. Okay, so enough fun facts about the city of Washington, D.C. We are going to do a tour of monuments today. And to do that, there's many, many, many monuments all through Washington, D.C., including the ones that you're going to see today. There's about 65 others as well. But we are going to visit some of the major ones that's located on the National Mall. So the National Mall is this area located right here. I'll highlight that again for you. And the National Mall is run by the National Park Service. So as we zoom in here, and the National Mall, right at the center of the National Mall is the Washington Monument. So we're going to see this, but just so you know that the Washington Monument, you can see from all, anywhere that you go on the National Mall, you can always use it as a landmark. So as we zoom around from the Thomas Jefferson Memorial, which we're going to see, this is the Lincoln Memorial. You may have seen that before. It's on the back of your U.S. penny. Then we have the White House, where you can see the Washington Monument. And if we go to the other side in the National Mall, where the U.S. Capitol is located, you can still see the Washington Monument. So that just gives you an idea of where we're going to be going today on our virtual field trip. So we're going to get down and dirty and go down on the ground and see all of those monuments and memorials, or many of those. So I would like to go ahead and get some shout outs before we get started to everyone that's joining us today. So we have Mr. Rathbone's classroom. They are from Songs Locks Elementary School, 5th graders. Shout out to you guys. We also have Mrs. Moore's 5th graders from Forest City, Iowa. Welcome to you guys. We have Mrs. Carfin's classroom from Lowell, Massachusetts, 4th graders. Shout out to you guys. And you guys are getting bumped out of Cahoots. Huh? We'll see how that goes. We may have to restart it. Also on camera today, we have Mrs. Bajorno, 2nd and 3rd graders from Richmond Hill, Georgia. Welcome to the show, guys. All right, and does anyone in your classroom have a fun fact today for us?
We do. We do have a fun fact. Hi.
Okay, go ahead.
The Library of Congress is the biggest library in the world. It has more than 162 million objects in its collection.
Awesome. That is a great fun fact. Yeah, it's one of the biggest it is the biggest library in the world as far as its collection goes. So super duper awesome. If you want to see a really cool video on that, if you have our Facebook page, you can go check it out. We just posted a video up there this week. It's really awesome. We also have Mrs. Stouffer's 3rd graders from Lecanto, Florida. Welcome to the show, guys.
Okay, say your thing.
Hi, my name is Destiny. The fun fact that I have is when the White House was built, it was painted with salt, rice, and glue.
Ooh, that is a great fun fact. So I didn't know that. So salt, rice, and glue. That's awesome. All right. So for anybody that was getting worried by our Cahoots, yes, my browser crashed in the background. So I restarted it. So hopefully It's the same game pin, it looks like, so hopefully everyone will be able to get in there. All right, we also have Mrs. Let's see, Freeburgers, if I'm saying that correctly, classroom. They're second graders from Lanesville, Indiana. Welcome to the show, guys.
Say hi. And then Jack, you're going to go and stand on up.
All right, do you have a fun fact for us today?
You guys nice and quiet so they can hear Jack.
When they, in 1854, when they were building the Washington Monument, the people who were building it ran out of money, so they had to use marble from a different quarry, and it turned out to be 2 different colors.
Ooh, great fun fact. And we're going to see that today. So everyone look out for that, because I'm definitely going to point it out. But see if you see it first before I point it out. Is the Washington Monument has rock from 2 different, or had 2 different colors of rock that are from 2 different places. So great fun fact there. So lots of people over on Twitter. We have Mrs. Ingsdale's classroom from Forest City, Ohio. Mrs. Beaverson's 3rd graders from Golden Valley, Minnesota. Shout out to you guys as well. Mrs. Let's see, Scopa MB3 is visiting with us today. They're 3rd graders from Golden Valley as well. Also on Twitter, we have Mrs. Stouffer's classroom that we just met, WWP Library over on Twitter as well. So we'll try to get to everyone, but we're going to go ahead and jump in to today's virtual field trip. We'll come back to our shout outs. And one more really quickly is Mrs. Nito's classroom is here as well. So shout out to you guys. So I've split up our monuments and memorials today into 2 groups. And so we're going to look at famous people, and then we're going to look at ones that are dedicated to past wars and U.S. veterans. So those are our 2 sections that we're going to be looking at today. And so we're going to start with important people from the past U.S. history. So we're going to start off with our virtual tour at the Washington Monument. So you're looking at all this green area here. This is the National Mall, So just to point out again, this is the U.S. Capitol over here to the east side. To the north is the White House. To the west is the Lincoln Memorial. And at the furthest tip here is the Thomas Jefferson Memorial. Now, what's interesting, which we're going to see in here shortly, but all of this land that the Thomas Jefferson Memorial is built on, that the Lincoln Memorial is built on, it used to be just swampland. So they actually dredged the river here and built up that land. So it's funny because the Lincoln Memorial sits on land that was not there when President Lincoln was in the White House. All right, so we're going to start at the Washington Monument in the center of the National Mall. We'll walk by the reflection pool, and then we'll take a look at the Lincoln Memorial before heading to the Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial. Then we will see the FDR, or Franklin Roosevelt's Memorial, and we'll finish up at the Thomas Jefferson Memorial. Sorry, I kind of showed you the wrong spot. Thomas Jefferson Memorial. And that's going to wrap up our tour of the famous people memorials. So let's go ahead and start with the first one that was dedicated. So here we see in the background, what's really nice is you can use the Washington Monument as a landmark. So no matter where you go, you can always see the Washington Monument when you're at the National Mall. So the Washington Monument is, it is 555 feet tall. Let's pull it back. There we go. 555 feet tall and 5 1/8 inches. When it was built, or when it was finished in 1884. So we had a great fun fact. So it took 40 years to complete. So they stopped building it because they ran out of money, and for a long, long time. But when it was finished in 1984 at over 555 feet, it was the tallest structure in the world. But that got beat out years later by the Eiffel Tower. So when they built the Eiffel Tower in Paris, that became the new tallest structure in the world in the late 1800s. So here we're going to get a close-up. So we'll get a better shot when I show you some photos here. But as you can see, there are 2 different colors of the stone that was used to construct the Washington Monument. And that's because they ran out of money, as we learned from one of our classrooms, and they reconstructed it with different material. This is at the bottom. Originally, they planned to build a lot larger building at the bottom, but that did not work out. And also, there's an elevator, so you can ride an elevator up the middle of the Washington Monument. And when that elevator was first built, it was a steam engine elevator, and it took 20 minutes to get up that 555 feet. Today, it only takes a couple minutes. However, it's currently closed. So the Washington Monument will be closed until 2019. So sorry, guys, if you're going there soon, because they are reconstructing the elevator to make it safer. Now we're at the reflection pool. The reflection pool, even though it looks like it's close to the Washington Monument, is not really that close to it. So this is a very famous image here, but it's not really that close to it. And technically, this is the Lincoln Memorial reflection pool. It is the largest reflection pool of the many reflection pools found throughout Washington, D.C. It was constructed in 1922, and it took about a year to build. And it has about 6,700,050 gallons of water in it. Whoa, that's a lot. And now we're at the Lincoln Memorial. So the Lincoln Memorial is the most visited memorial of all of the ones that we're going to see today. And so about 6 million people come here a year. And there are, when we look at the building before we walk inside, it's 99 feet tall, and it is over 200 feet wide. 200 feet wide, but it goes 132 feet down underground. And part of that's because it has to sit on the bedrock, because remember, all the ground here, they actually built it up from the dredged dirt they pulled out of the bottom of the river. As we look at the statue of President Lincoln, so President Lincoln was our 16th president, and the statue has 28 pieces, but it's 19 feet tall and it's 19 feet wide, and it weighs about 120 tons, just the statue. Inside of the building are excerpts from two of his most famous speeches. One is the Gettysburg Address, and one that we're looking at here is his second inauguration speech. And here's a little fun fact. Maybe you can look it up on Google later, but right over here, he says the word future in his second inauguration speech. And when the person carved the word future into the wall here, they actually carved an E. So it says E instead of F. And let me write over here where you can see. And someone came behind and tried to smudge it out. So it's kind of like a smudged bottom piece of the E that's out. But you can still see today that it was definitely an F. It was definitely an E when they made it, but they tried to turn it into an F. So a little fun fact for you there. What's really neat, this is one of the most iconic pictures in all of the nation's capital, and one of the reasons is because this very spot, just where these people are standing down here, there's actually a stone here that has an engraving in it. This is where Dr. Martin Luther King stood when he gave his famous "I Have a Dream" speech in 1963 in the March on Washington. Speaking of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., this is one of the more recent memorials. So this one was finished in 2011. It only took about a year to build. And speaking of his "I Have a Dream" speech, so when we look at it here, there's a line in his speech that says, "Out of the mountain of despair, a stone of hope." So this represents the mountain of despair, and this is the stone of hope. So we're going to walk through the mountain of despair, and we'll take a look at the stone of hope. There we go. And on the front side of the stone of hope, there's that quote there, is a carving of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. It's about 30 feet high, this carving into the stone of hope. And all around the area, so the total land here is about 4 acres. that this memorial sits on. This wall that we see going off each side of the Mountain of Despair is 450 feet long. It's the inscription wall, and it has 14 of his some of his most famous quotes. There's park rangers that kind of stand out here during the day that will answer questions. So we're going to head over to the Franklin Roosevelt Memorial. This is the largest memorial as far as land goes. It's a little over 7 acres in size, and it is it has like 4 outside rooms, and each one of those rooms represents one of his terms. So he served 4 terms, not 2 terms like most presidents. There was no limit when FDR was president, and he served for 4 terms. This is interesting because when the monument was finished, or sorry, this is a memorial. When the memorial was dedicated in 1997, this statue was not here. But many people were upset because if you do not know this, FDR, his legs were paralyzed from polio, and he had to use a wheelchair. But during his life, he always hid the fact that he had to use a wheelchair, and much of the public did not know because he thought it made him look weak. But many people today, and because of the National Organization on Disabilities, they raised $1.65 million to build this statue, and that really clearly shows him in a wheelchair. And what's really interesting, another fun fact here, is FDR made his own wheelchair. He designed it out of a standard kitchen table. Or sorry, not a table, a kitchen chair, a standard kitchen table chair. And he put a bicycle tires on it. And because of that, it didn't have the big side arms of a normal wheelchair, and he could throw a blanket over his legs and he could look like he's sitting in a regular chair. Again, he tried to hide the fact at all times that he was paralyzed. So we're going to walk into another open room. Many of what we find here at the Franklin Roosevelt Memorial is to the time he was a president for a long, long time, 4 terms. So in each one of these, Great Depression and World War II happened during this time. So lots of artwork dedicated to those time periods. This was his wife, Eleanor Roosevelt. And Eleanor Roosevelt really set the stage for most modern first ladies. She was very active in helping her husband do the work of the presidency. So she had many initiatives and many things that she did for the people of the United States. And many first ladies that have come after her have not just been the wife of the president. They have really actively served the public, and she kind of started that whole thing. All right, so here we have fallen down boulders, and this is to represent World War II. So all the chaos that was happening during World War II, this is meant to represent that. So we have walls that are falling and crippling down. The world was falling down at that time. Lots of beautiful artwork that's dedicated to the Great Depression there. And this is the Thomas Jefferson Memorial. We can kind of see Thomas Jefferson really in his construction that he used at his home in Monticello, and also at the University of Virginia. They use lots of classic Greek architecture, and this was kind of a homage to that. You can see this building looks very, very ancient. And inside, we have a 19-foot tall statue of Thomas Jefferson. It weighs about 10,000 pounds. And what's interesting is the building here, the outside of the building is made from marble from Georgia and Vermont. And that represented the outer states, so the northern and most southern states, when Thomas Jefferson became president. But Thomas Jefferson signed the Louisiana Purchase from France. And so the inside uses marble that came from areas that the U.S. acquired from the Louisiana Purchase. So a lot of the marble found on the inside is from more western states. So it's really unique how they built that. Another fun fact about the statue: this memorial was built during World War II, and during World War II, there was a ban on metal. So there was a wartime metal ration, And because of that, the original statue was made of plaster, and it was painted. It was painted with bronze paint. But today, they replaced that in 1947 with the current bronze statue. So after World War II, the metal ration was lifted, and they were able to make this out of bronze instead of plaster. And he has lots of quotes from the Declaration of Independence, which he was the primary writer for. And as we can see, the big dome here. The entire building here is 160, I want to say 65 feet in diameter, the Thomas Jefferson Memorial. So again, Washington Monument. We'll show you a couple of those close-up pictures of the different colors. I really love these here. You can really see right there and right here on the right-hand side, you can really see the difference of the colors between the stone. And so it was built up to this height, and they ran out of money, and they did not finish it until the 1880s, and it was started in the 1840s. So here's some pictures. We learned a fun fact about the Library of Congress earlier. So these photos, you can find all sorts of cool historical photos. You can do that online at the Library of Congress. So this photo came, this was a drawing of that partially built Washington Monument. And there's another one. Here's some interesting recent history because of recent earthquakes. The monument had to be repaired to make it more structurally sound, and actually that's what they're doing now as well with the elevator. So remember, if you go there today, you can't ride the elevator up until you get until 2019 when they reopen it. So it's not as close as you think. It's quite a far walk to get to the reflection pool. And on the edge here, a lot of people want to know how deep it is. It's 18 inches on the edge of the reflection pool, but in the center of the reflection pool, it is 30 inches deep. There's no fish or anything in it. I did see some ducks. You can kind of see in the distance there, there's some ducks and geese swimming around, but those are wild animals that have made it their home. All right, this is a really iconic shot, really beautiful how the Washington Monument reflects in the reflecting pool. This was redone in 2010. It was renovated because it had a leak in the bottom and it was losing water. So they had to keep pumping water in it. So they drained it, redid the bottom, made it more reflective, and they did that in the year 2010. And I can tell you it looks a lot better because when I came here as a sixth grader with my school field trip in a long time ago, it was pretty nasty. It was filled up with algae and it was in bad shape. Today it looks really nice. The Lincoln Memorial, a couple of photos for you there. Again, that statue is 19 feet tall, 19 feet wide. And maybe we can see a little bit better there. There's that E instead of an F on the second inauguration. All right, MLK Memorial. Again, the Mountain of Despair, and there's MLK. Now, this is only the fourth memorial in Washington, D.C. that was not for a president. Not for a president, and it was the first one that was not of a white person, so of a minority. So really historic memorial. I had a great question yesterday. Besides Eleanor Roosevelt, which is really at her husband's memorial, there are really no women memorials that I am aware of. So we need to change that. So if you young ladies out there, you want to start getting some movements going to build some memorials for some of our great women from the nation, definitely get on that. FDR, we were just talking about some of the nice artwork that's found. Here's an iconic shot from the Great Depression that is built with statues here, people waiting in bread lines. And this was the original statue of FDR here is still there, but they added the one in the wheelchair. So this this caused controversy with people that wanted to show that he was in a wheelchair. And what's really cool is this entire memorial, everything is really accessible for anyone. So you don't need a ramp. Everything's built to be accessible for people with disabilities. And a lot of people are interested to know his little dog, Phyla, I believe was the name of the dog. Yeah, Phyla. All right, and the Jefferson Memorial, again, each one of the pillars that are surrounded, or the columns that are surrounded the building. So there's 54 columns. Each one is 43 feet tall. And this was finished in 1943. But remember, the statue in there of Thomas Jefferson, this one, the newer one, was not put in until 1947. All right. Thomas Jefferson, some of his quotes there, and you can see that monument from anywhere that you are located in the National Mall, which is really cool. So we're going to go ahead and open up the floor for some questions. And so if you are not on camera with us, go ahead and start sending those in so we can make sure we don't miss yours. A couple shout outs real quick. Mrs. Ryan's classroom in Holden Elementary, 4th graders. Welcome to the show, guys. We also, Mrs. Scapa's classroom, if I'm saying that correctly, 3rd graders from Golden Valley in Minnesota. Welcome to the show, guys. And Mrs. Wilkins' class, of course, from Lowell. So go ahead and get your questions in. We're going to start with Mrs. Let's go over in Lanesville first this time. And do you guys have any questions about any of the memorials that we've seen so far?
Okay, Ava's going up. Give her a sec. Yes, we do. One sec. She's on her Making her way. Okay, so you're going to turn
Ava.
that one up there, Ava. Okay. Nice and low.
How long did it take to build the White House?
The White House. You know, I don't have in my notes because I have the White House on a little bit of bonus footage. I can find it. But what's really interesting, what I do know off the top of my head about the White House is that George Washington never lived in the White House. It was not finished. I believe John Adams, our second president, was the first president to live in the White House. And then many of the government buildings, so the entire city of Washington, D.C. wasn't technically finished until the 1860s. And the reason for that is because a few things. Well, one is it took a long time to get the city, people to move to the city. It was they created a city out of nothing. And so it took a long time to get people to really start moving in, businesses and so forth, to move into the city. The second reason is because they had a few setbacks. So in the War of 1812, the British marched right into Washington, D.C., and they burned every government building that they could find. So most of the buildings were burned down, and they had to rebuild them. Great fun facts there for you. Let's go over to Mrs. Stouffer's classroom. Do you guys have a question for us?
Alexa.
How did the builders get all the way to the top?
Of what?
Which one?
The
Washington Monument?
Yeah, the big one.
So they would use scaffolding. Let me go here. So they would use scaffolding. I don't know if you remember from the old picture that I saw, but at the top, so each time they would build up a layer, they would have wooden scaffolding, which they would on the inside, and cranes. So they would lift up the stones, I assume, up the center of it, and then put the stones on the outside of the Washington Monument. What's really interesting about the Washington Monument is the very tip top. So the very top block of the Washington Monument, all by itself, let's see, it weighs, the capstone weighs 3,300 pounds just by itself. So just the very top block, which is really interesting. Let's go over to Mrs. Bajorno's classroom. Do you guys have a question for us?
Why did it take the Washington Monument so long to build?
Right. The Washington Monument has a really long, complicated history. One is because Americans did not want to build any monuments at first. It was not very popular to build monuments or memorials for people because at that time in the world, most of monuments and memorials were built for kings and queens. And so if you remember the history of the Revolution, Americans were not very they didn't like the idea of building a monument or a memorial for a person. In fact, even having a president, not a lot of people wanted to have a president in our country because they thought they would have too much power. They would be too much like a king or like a queen. And so I think for many of those reasons, it took a long time to get some momentum behind building a monument. And it was not until 1933 that the Washington National Monument Society was formed to build something for George Washington. However, there was an earlier one that was built. People didn't like it. They got rid of it after 2 years, a statue that was near the Capitol of George Washington. And they got rid of that. And finally, they settled on a plan. And then they ran out of money. It just one thing after another. It took a very long time. And the Civil War happened during that time. So nothing was happening during the Civil War. So there were many, many reasons why it took so long to build. Great question there. Okay, so let's go ahead and see what questions we have coming in. I did find out really quickly. So the White House, so John Adams moved in after 8 years. So it took 8 years to construct, started in 1792 through 1800. However, it was not fully completed till then. And what's interesting is the White House was not always called the White House. And this is, I'm totally bringing this off the top of my head. You'll have to double check, fact check me, guys. You should always fact check everything you hear, but fact check me. And I believe it was Teddy Roosevelt who first gave the nickname the White House, but it could be formally, but I could be wrong on that. Okay, how many people visit Washington, D.C. every year, coming from Mrs. Wilkins' classroom? I don't know how many visit Washington, D.C., but if we talk about the National Mall, the National Park Service runs the National Mall. So that area, the green area that we're visiting today, is surrounded by many of the memorials and monuments in Washington, D.C., many of the national museums like the Air and Space Museum, many others. There's about 25 million visitors that come to the National Mall every year. Great question there. Mrs. Nito's classroom wants to know, what did they do with the old statue of Lincoln? So I don't know what happened. There have been many statues and memorials in the past that have been moved in favor of newer ones, and I don't really know about the old one of Lincoln. In fact, that's another problem. When we talk about why things take so long to get built sometimes is the people that lived in Washington, D.C., they kind of they liked their old statues that they already had. So when you had to get rid of one to build a bigger one, not everyone likes that. In fact, the National Mall that we saw today is all flat and grass. If you watch the president inauguration with Donald Trump recently, you can see that it's all grass and flat. That did not happen until the 1930s when Franklin Roosevelt cleared it. It used to be all trees there, and a lot of people didn't like that at the time. So there's lots of history there. Let's see. We have a question coming in from Mrs. Scappa's classroom. And, I lost it. Mrs. Moore's classroom, why is there not a monument for every president? I think it would be we would run out of space if we built a monument or memorial for each and every president. Mrs. Ryan's classroom wants to know, how long did it take to build the FDR Memorial? The FDR Memorial was completed this is another one that took a long time. It was completed in 1997, but Congress formed the Memorial Commission, the our Memorial Commission in 1955. It took them a long, long time to even get the ball rolling with building the thing. But I don't know the actual construction, how long the actual construction took of the FDR Memorial. But that's the statue that we saw later that was added much, much later in 2001 or 4 years later. Let's see, how many steps are in front of the Jefferson Memorial, and what is the significance of the 19 feet with Jefferson and Lincoln? All right, very detailed question. You know what? I don't know how many steps are at the Jefferson Memorial. I do know from the National Park Service's website that there's no significance with the number of steps at the Jefferson Memorial. However, the Lincoln Memorial has 87 steps from the top of the chamber down to the reflection pool. So I can tell you about the Lincoln Memorial. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and jump into looking at some of our veteran war memorials. So we'll have a chance to get through those. So let's go ahead and start that. So not only do we have memorials for people, so the difference between a monument and a memorial. So monuments can be a building or structure or statue. Generally, it's for like a time period, or it is for a person, like the Washington Monument. But it's more like for an idea, and a memorial is specifically for a person or group of people. So our veteran memorials that we're going to look at, so we're going to look at the Korean War Memorial. So that's right near the Lincoln Memorial. So if you remember, this is the Lincoln, this is the Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial. So the Korean War Memorial is right in between those two. Then we'll head over to the World War II Memorial and to the Vietnam War Memorial. So let's start here with the Korean War Memorial. The Korean War Memorial was dedicated in 1995, and there are 19 stainless steel statues of soldiers, and these represent soldiers. They don't all look the same because they represent soldiers not only from the Army, but also the Marines, Air Force, and Navy. They're wearing ponchos, and many of them are blowing in the wind, and that signifies Korea's cold, windy weather. And I can vouch for that because I lived there for 3 years, and it is cold and windy in the wintertime in Korea. There is a wall, memorial wall, that's 164 feet at the Korean Memorial, and which has roughly 2,400 pictures that have been etched in from the war into the wall. Now, this is the World War II Memorial. So this is a more recent one. This was opened in 2004. And so this is, you'll see many images from the war. So this is D-Day around the sides of the memorial. There's one large pool in the center of the memorial. And then we see two large columns on each side. So over here, this is the Pacific column. And back over on this side, we have the Atlantic column. And so if you remember your World War II history, that it was fought in two main places. So the Europe end of the war and the Pacific side of the war. And so those two main columns represents those two areas. And if you'll notice, there's lots and lots of smaller columns all around. So there are 56 of these smaller granite columns, and each one of those represents the 48 states at that time and territories that participated in the war. So here we can see Missouri, Alabama, Michigan, Mississippi. So each state that participated in the war, that was all of them at the time. And then this is the Vietnam War Memorial. And this is a really interesting one because it's built into the side of a hill, and it's just two long walls with the names of the fallen soldiers. And this one was the first memorial that was built entirely on private donations. And one of the iconic things to do at the Vietnam War Memorial, It's because it has people's names. It's people come here to find names of family members or loved ones that they knew, and they do pencil or crayon rubbings of those people. So the Korean War Memorial is kind of shaped like a triangle here from the sky, and the platoon of soldiers is walking into the points of that triangle. And what's really was really special when I was here visiting is you see all the people in the yellow jackets. Those are actual veterans from the Korean War. So this gentleman to the right here actually fought in the Korean War. So you can only imagine what this place means to past veterans that fought in the war. And it's dedicated to the over 36,000 U.S. members that died and over 160,000 U.S. soldiers that were wounded during the Korean War. That was fought, many countries from the UN fought in the war, so there's not only people from the US and many, many Koreans. So war is a bad thing. So when we see all these names and talk about numbers today, so here we go. These wreaths were dedicated by South Korea and over at the memorial as a thank you. And again, some of those soldiers. World War II Memorial. Here's the layout. You can see it's right beside the reflection pool. This is the Lincoln Memorial reflection pool that we've been talking about. And so again, this is one of the newer ones, and it was opened in 2004. One of the questions earlier was, what time do they close, or if it's always open? Well, some of these, the open air ones, like the Vietnam Memorial, the World War II Memorial that we see here, the Korean Memorial, they're open 24/7. The only difference is they don't have park rangers out here, but during work hours to answer questions and tell stories. There is one statue at the Vietnam War Memorial. It's called a three-soldier statue. But here's the wall. We can see that it's just two walls. This is a very famous Mrs. Maya Lin won the design competition to build this in 1982. It was built and constructed. It was finished in 1982, and part of that's because it was a controversial war. Some people didn't want a memorial here. Some people did, and but they built it. And one of the reasons this design won is because there was nothing political in it. It's just a wall of the fallen soldiers from the war, and this is the three-soldier statue. The names on the wall they're listed in order of death, so it's not alphabetical. And there are websites where you can look up names and find exactly what panel and where they're located on the wall. And again, if you look at these names, I think this is a great reminder. War is a very bad thing. So all of these names here represents a father, a brother, or a son, or there's women on here too. So or mother, or daughter, or sister of actual people. So war is a bad thing. And this is only the U.S. side. So you can think about the Vietnamese during this war, Cambodians, lots of other people, Laos lost many more people than the U.S. did. So a lot of people in the world die from wars. So they're kind of not a great thing. Okay, so we'll go ahead and open up the floor for questions. And it can be about the war memorials or any of the memorials that we've seen today. So go ahead and start sending those in. Mrs. Golub's classroom wants to know, did they use rice, salt, and glue to paint the White House? That's what we learned from one of our classrooms in our fun facts. So Mrs. Wilkins' classroom wants to know how many names are on the wall at the memorial. And in 1982, there were 57,935 names on the wall when it was finished. Today, or in 2015, there were 58,307 names on the wall. So why is there an increase? Well, even if you die today from injuries that you got during the war, that that counts as your death counts towards being because of that war. So that's one of the reasons. Other times, people were later discovered that were missing in action. Okay, great questions there. And how long was the Washington Monument been closed? So I don't know when they closed it now, and it's been fairly recently. I do know that. And it's going to be, again, closed through 2019. Okay, let's start this time over in Mrs. Stouffer's classroom. And do you guys have a question for us about any of our memorials we've seen today?
Hi, my name is Sophia. What was the first memorial built?
The first one, well, there were a couple of ones that were built prior to that, to the Washington Monument. But the first one that we have seen today of the major monuments and memorials was the Washington Monument. But again, there was a different one that was built for Washington before this one, but people didn't like it and they got rid of it only after 2 years. So there's been a long history of them. They've gone through a couple different ones. And there's older ones around DC as well, not in the National Mall. Okay, let's go over to Mrs. Bajorno's classroom. Do you guys have a question there?
Hi. How long did it take to build all of the memorials?
All of them? The longest, the Washington Monument, took 40 years. The shortest, the Vietnam Memorial, was built in a year. So it seems today, once they decide to build one, if it's most of the monuments today seem to be less grand, like the Lincoln Memorial or the Jefferson Memorial, and they're more about space. So if we look at the MLK or the FDR or the World War II, most of the war ones that you saw, it's more about the space. And I think that's the current trend with the memorials today. And I kind of like that personally. They don't close down because there's no inside to it. So they can keep them open at all times, and more people can get in and out. And so, yeah, and that pretty much started with the Vietnam War Memorial. That was like the first one that was more about the space than it was about this statue. Look at this statue of Thomas Jefferson, or this statue of President Lincoln. So yes, great questions there. And let's go over to Lanesville. Do you guys have a question over there?
On the wall, are there pictures of real people or fake people?
On which wall? On the Korean War Memorial?
Yeah.
Yeah, so those were taken from the National Archives. So actual photos, those etchings were made from real photos from the Korean War. So great question there, guys. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and play. We're getting kind of later into the show. I have time for additional questions afterwards, but we're going to go ahead and play our Kahoot quiz for classrooms that need to run early. We also had a couple questions. Will we see any of the Capitol or White House or anything like that? I do have a little bonus section, so I can show you a little bit of that if you have time to stick around. If you don't, no worries. You can run at any time during the Geo Show. We don't hold you down. So go ahead and grab your Kahoots, and we're going to go ahead and play our Geo quiz for today. If you've never played on Kahoot before, remember, the quicker you answer the questions correctly, the more points you will be awarded. And you have the opportunity to win a postcard from me, GOB, from the Learn Around the World Studios. So let's go ahead and grab those, get logged in. If you're not already, today's game pin is 344118. Again, that's 344118. I will give you a couple seconds to continue to get logged in. Couple of great questions coming in while we wait for that. So Mrs. Gollop's classroom wants to know is who gets to decide which monuments get built. So typically, each one obviously usually has a life of its own, but generally what happens today is there's some type of society or group of people that that kind of petitions or lobbies to get a memorial or monument built. And today they raise a lot of that money to build it. But at the end of the day, the Congress has to approve it. So if it gets approved, that can by Congress, which can take a long, long time. Some of them, like the Thomas Jefferson Memorial, FDR was the president during that time, and he wanted that memorial because he liked Thomas Jefferson, and he kind of fast-tracked that through. So if you're the president and you want one built, you probably have a little bit more influence than if you are a group in North Carolina that wants to get something built for Michael Jordan. I don't know. I just made that up. Okay, let's go ahead and start our Kahoot quiz. Good luck, everyone. All right, first question today is, who chose the location of Washington, D.C.? Was it red, George Washington, blue, John Adams, yellow, Thomas Jefferson, or green, Abraham Lincoln? All right, so it was Thomas. It was George Washington. Good job, guys. All right, so our leader currently is Sebastian, followed by SK. Are you going to catch him, guys? Get ready. What war memorials are located on the National Mall? Is it red, Korean, blue, Vietnam, yellow, World War II, or green, all of these? All right, is green, all of these is the best answer. It's the best answer. All right, and Donald is in the lead. Good job, Donald.
That means we have to be super.
All right, next question. Which memorial was not dedicated to a president that we saw today? All right, was it Washington, Lincoln, Jefferson, or MLK? All right, it was the MLK Memorial. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was not a president of the United States. Hot Dogs is in the lead. Good job, Hot Dogs. Next question, which is the most visited of the memorials? Is it red, Washington Memorial, blue, Jefferson, yellow, Lincoln, or green, MLK Memorial? All right, it is the MLK Memorial, and our new leader is Braden. All right, FDR made his wheelchair out of what? Was it a beanbag, blue kitchen chair, yellow a piano stool, or green a lawn chair? All right, it was a kitchen chair. And today's winner is, all right, Braden. So if you are Braden's teacher, please, please, please email me. Do not put it in the chat box here, or I will not find it. I promise you that. So email me at brandon@learnaroundtheworld.com with your school address. That's how snail mail works. And you'll get one of these guys from me, from the Learn Around the World studios. So I am going to go ahead and end our recording, but I have time to keep answering your questions if you have time to stick around with us. So don't go anywhere if you have the time. If you do have to run today, thanks so much for hanging out with us today. Maybe a further activity you can do with your classroom is, who do you think the next memorial or monument should be built after? Maybe you can do that, decide with your class. Should it be a woman? Maybe. So that'd be cool to do later on today, possibly. Today's all-free virtual field trip was brought to you by flatclass.club. Check out the Flat Class podcast and see how to knock down your classroom walls and bring the world into your classroom. I'm GOB. You've been watching the Geo Show, and keep exploring.